So thank you for coming. I'm Chris Tillman, the English Department, Director of Creative Writing, and delighted, very especially delighted to have Homero here and to be doing this bilingual poetic conversation. It's something that we've been working towards for a year or two. So I'm just thrilled that we're here now. A couple of things. Number one, the cell phones. I do not own a cell phone. I have never upset anyone with my cell phone, but all of you own cell phones. And every one of you is a potential problem. So please turn them off. Number two, this little forum is huge for us. It represents our interest in poetry in this wonderful Festival of the Book. And more important for this evening, it represents our interest in global poetry and in a bilingual reading like this. So I beg you, fill out this guide. There's not much to it. Those of you that have been here year after year know this, but it's no small thing. It really is what makes, this is the most important ballot you'll cast for poetry. Rita Dove is going to introduce Homero and his work, and then she will tell us how this will go, but I'm going to introduce Rita. But briefly. But before we do that, I want to say that Homero being here has been a tremendous amount of organization through several organizations. And it's involved, I think, Homero and his wife Betty, who has done so much of the organizing of this. I think she's gotten emails from 9 different people. I think so, Betty, maybe it's 10, maybe it's just 8. But still, those people from the organizations they represent need to be acknowledged. And the first is, of course, the Virginia Festival of the Book. And under Nancy Damon's leadership, that's why we're here. The second organization is my own organization, the Program in Creative Writing in the English Department. We stand here as the 2 primary sponsors. But by the tiniest margin, behind us is the Department of Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, who've done a tremendous amount of legwork and helped us in their great enthusiasm for Homero and his work. And also a lovely organization, Split This Rock Poetry Festival in DC, which this weekend is featuring Homero in some presentations in their somewhat alternative, I'm forgetting it, Homero, but poems of, what is it? Do you recall?
Do you remember the concept?
Focusing on social justice, environmental justice.
Exactly. So Split This Rock is a wonderful organization, and they have been, they took the first step in bringing Homero here. So all of that is important stuff. It sounds like boilerplate, but it isn't, and this is not boilerplate either. Simply to say that our moderator, Commonwealth Professor of Poetry, Rita Dove, is well known to many of you and well known internationally. Her most recent works, and of course recent is what you say, what's happened in the last year or two, Sonata Mulatica, her poetry collection, and then last fall, the huge Penguin Anthology of 20th Century American Poetry, which she edited, a labor of love, if there ever was one. Last March, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. If you look at those American academies, there's a certain hierarchy, and that's the top of the heap. And as many of you know, most recently was seen on national TV receiving the 2011 National Medal of the Arts from President Obama. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rita, and thank you for coming.
My thanks to that heap, because it is what we're trying to do here tonight is truly exciting and cutting edge. And just the very rearrangement of the stage speaks to many different groups working together to try to give you a different sense of a poetry reading, give you a sense of both languages, both the translations and the beautiful original. But now it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Mexican poet, novelist, journalist, diplomat, and environmental activist, Homero Aridjis, to our midst. He is accompanied by his wife, Betty, who's been his wife for 40 plus years. She's one of her
47.
Okay, woo! Yeah. She's also one of the translators, her husband's translators into English, and I've known Homero and Betty for a quarter of a century or more, I think, ever since they invited me and my husband to participate in a huge international poetry festival in Mexico City in 1987. And our paths have crossed a number of times since in Morelia, Mexico, where Homero brought together scientists and writers from all over the world to find a common ground regarding environmental challenges that face our planet in the face of vast technological progress. Also at international festivals in Berlin and Rotterdam, and more than a decade ago, in the middle of a huge rainstorm here in Virginia, Homero spoke at Sweetbriar College. The role of a poet as diplomat is not entirely uncommon among Latin American poets. Think Pablo Neruda and Octavio Paz. Homero Aridjis was Mexico's ambassador to the Netherlands and to Switzerland when he was still in his 30s. And most recently, from 2007 to 2010, he was the president of the of UNESCO in Paris. Ambassador there as well from Mexico. He served as president of the PEN International from 1997 to 2003. This is a man, a citizen of the world. But as those of you who know Spanish might suspect, the names Homero and Aridjis do not have Latin roots. Homero's father hailed from a Greek settlement in Asia Minor near Smyrna. And it turned out that in the late 30s, he met Homero's mother while exploring Mexico in a very small town of Contepec in Michoacan. It is a place, as their son would describe later in his poetry, a place of dust, of words, of starry nights. And despite the fact that the father's Spanish was poor and the mother's Greek non-existent, the two hit it off. And so their child, born in 1940, grew up immersed in Spanish and indigenous Mexican tongues while bearing an entirely Greek name, Homero Aridjis. No wonder he developed a special relationship to languages, its juxtapositions, and the expressive depths. He fell deeply in love with reading and began writing, and at the tender age of 19, actually received a fellowship to the Mexico City Writing Center, which was partly sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it was in Mexico City of the 1960s, bohemian scene, that Homero met the love of his life, Betty Ferber, who was backpacking through Central America after college. They married, and should I give away the dates? I don't know. They married in 1965. They raised two extraordinary daughters, Ava, who's a filmmaker, who now lives in New York, and Homero just told me she finished her 4th film now, and Chloe, a novelist, who has made her home in Europe for the past decade. And all of this would have been more than enough of a life for any ordinary mortal, but not for Homero, who has published more than 40, count them 40, books of poetry and prose, among them a novel entitled 1492, The Life and Times of Juan Cabezon of Castile, which was a New York Times notable book of the year in 1992. Among his other awards and honors in the U.S. alone are 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, an honorary doctorate from Indiana University, and visiting professorships at New York University, Columbia, and the University of California at Irvine. as if that wasn't enough, he writes as a columnist on environmental, political, and cultural topics for several newspapers, and he can be found commenting on the problems of the environment and his country on NPR or in the New York Times. But he comes to us tonight as a poet of international renown. His erstwhile mentor, Octavio Paz, who was the 1992 Nobel laureate, had this to say about his former protege, quote, "In the poetry of Homero Aridjis there is a gaze, the pulse of the poet, the discontinuous time of practical and rational life, and the continuity of desire and death. There is the poet's primal truth." Seamus Heaney, also a Nobel Prize winner, exclaimed simply, "Homero Aridjis' poems open a door into light." And to continue this Nobel theme just a little further, more than 10 years before making his own visit to the Swedish Academy, the eminent French writer Jean-Marie Gustave Leclisio published a beautiful article under the title, "The Man Who Frequents Angels," in which he compared Homero Aridjis to Wilfred Owen and T.S. Eliot and praised his refusal of compromise because he knows the force of words, the only inalienable dignity. Leclisio went on to say, throughout this body of work there is a desire for light, an invocation of the sun, which is likened to what is most profound and ancient in Mexican culture. If, as Homero Aridjis writes in his 1975 volume, Exaltation of Light, the poet's task is to pull song from rock, he also wishes to move along the ground, swift and hidden, like a loose thread pulled from a spool. In other words, to be among the small things, but not to die of fatigue and desire. This modern day Homer exhorts us to spend your life with your eyes turned on, to which I can only lift my eyes in salutation and reply, amen. So I would like you to join me in welcoming Homero Aridjis to the University of I thought what we were going to do, we discussed this a lot, and how we were going to handle this, but I think the best way to do it is Homero will read first, each poem first, and then I will follow with the English translation so that you can get the full force of the Spanish before I...
Autorretrato a los 54 años. Soy Homero Aridjis. Nací en Contepec, Michoacán. Tengo 54 años, esposa y 2 hijas. En el comedor de mi casa tuve mis primeros amores, Dickens, Cervantes, Shakespeare y el otro Homero. Un domingo en la tarde, Frankenstein salió del cine del pueblo y a la orilla de un arroyo le dio la mano a un niño que era yo. El Prometeo formado con retazos humanos siguió su camino, pero desde entonces, por ese encuentro con el monstruo, el verbo y el horror son míos.
Self-portrait at 54 years old. I am Homero Aridjis. I was born in Contepec, Michoacán. I am 54 with a wife and 2 daughters. In the dining room of my house, I had my first loves, Dickens, Cervantes, Shakespeare, and the other Homer. One Sunday afternoon, Frankenstein came out of the town movie house, and on a stream's bank, held out his hand to a boy who was me. The Prometheus, pieced out of human remnants, went on his way, but since then, out of that encounter with the monster, the verb and the horror are mine.
Turista de 1954. Sobre una cama del Hotel Genève, ella me preguntó por las montañas que rodean la Ciudad de México. Yo contemplé los senos solitarios de su vida, que como picos blandos se alzan a la caída de la noche. Ella me contó que en el mercado del Volador compró joyas de hace 100 años a precios razonables. Yo miré sus ojos sin valor alguno de aquí a 100 años. Ella me preguntó por el Salón México, donde los hombres bailan con overol y sombrero, y por el restaurante El Retiro, donde los aficionados al toreo, los domingos por la tarde, después de la corrida, corren a comer las entrañas de los toros muertos. Yo la abracé en la noche íntima del cuarto y dancé en su oscuridad y comí en su vida. Ella me habló de paseos por los suburbios y me platicó de hombres a caballo que silbaban a su paso en Coyoacán y en Churubusco. Yo sentí celos de lo que sus ojos vieron y de lo que no vieron. Finalmente, ya casi al alba, dormimos como un cuerpo solo, sin plazas y sin calles, sin caras y sin hombres, rodeados por las sombras del país inmenso.
Tourist in 1934. In a bed at the Hotel Genève, she asked me about the mountains that surround Mexico City. I brooded upon the solitary breasts of her life that rise like land peaks at nightfall. She told me that in Volador Market she bought jewels 100 years old at reasonable prices. I gazed into her eyes with no value at all 100 years from now. She asked me about the Salón México, where men dance in hats and overalls, and about the Retiro restaurant where bullfight fans hurry of a Sunday afternoon after the corrida to tuck into the innards of the dead bulls. I embraced her in the intimate night of the room and danced in her darkness and ate into her life. She talked to me of strolling in the suburbs and told me about the men on horseback who whistled at her going by in Coyoacán and Churubusco. I felt jealous of what their eyes saw and what they did not see. Finally, at dawn, we slept like a single body, without squares, without streets, nameless and faceless, hugged by the shadows of the immense land.
Límites, jaulas y paredes. Ponemos fechas a la sombra, alambradas al presente. Enjaulamos a los cuerpos con horarios, en pajareras de ladrillo. Ponemos a la imaginación zapatos que al aire, camisa y pantalones. Cercamos la mirada del hombre y capturamos sus deseos con redes. Ponemos cerrojos al ojo, llaves a la mano, límites al rayo. Pero la vida guarda sus distancias, el amor, sus palabras, y la poesía amanece donde quiere.
We pin dates to shadows, wire in the present, shut a body into a schedule, into brick bird cages. We put shoes on the imagination, shirt and pants on the open air. We fence in the outlook, haul in our desires with nets. We put bolts on the eyes, locks on the hands, limits to the lightning. But life keeps its distance, love to its word, and poetry comes up where it can.
Moctezuma y los tamemes. Moctezuma was the last emperor of Mexico when the Spaniards came, and the tamemes were the Indians of carga. They were serving like animals to transport cargo from place to place. The tamemes. Moctezuma y los tamemes. Los pies de Moctezuma no tocaban el suelo y su camino no tenía puertas. Los tamemes pisaban todos los lodos y su camino estaba lleno de cargas. Los oídos de Moctezuma escuchaban los cantos y su lengua profería las palabras de mando. Los tamemes recogían los insultos y su voz era la de los enzontles en los montes. Para tener a sus esposas y concubinas, Moctezuma solo se volteaba a su derecha o a su izquierda, y su progenie sagrada se propagaba luego por los 4 rumbos del imperio y de la muerte. Las mujeres de los tamemes acogían a los caciques y a los señores de la tierra, y sus hijos naturales atravesaban leguas portando con pies flacos la riqueza ajena. Sirvientes con besotes de cristal servían a Moctezuma perros, pescados y patos. Los tamemes cargaban cacao y maíz con su comida para el camino encima de la carga. Para conocer el pasado y el futuro, Moctezuma poseía adivinos y hechiceros, espejos de obsidiana, animales y llaves, y cautivos que sacrificaba a los dioses. Para saber su suerte, los tamemes miraban su condición presente y consultaban la desnudez y el hambre en su propio cuerpo. El día en que Moctezuma supo en la casa de lo negro que su ruina venía a caballo con los atavíos de un dios que se había perdido en el poniente, los tamemes no vieron nada en su día negro, solo cambiaron de dueño en la historia de México.
Moctezuma and his bearers. No door stood in his path. The feet of Moctezuma never touched ground. His bearers waded through all the mud, and their path was full of burdens. Moctezuma's ears heard songs, and words of command rolled off his tongue. His bearers picked up his insults, and their voice was as the mockingbirds on the hill. To possess his wives and concubines, Moctezuma only needed to roll left or right, and then and there his sacred offspring were fathered onto the 4 corners of death and the empire. The chieftains and lords of the land were entertained by his bearers' women, and their bastards trotted leagues on their skinny feet, bearing the bounty of others. Servants with lip plugs of crystal plied Moctezuma with fish and duck and dog. On top of a load of cocoa and corn, the bearers bore their own food for the road. To see into the past and future, Moctezuma had soothsayers and wizards, mirrors of obsidian, for sacrifice to the gods, animals, and captives, and birds. To tell their fate, the bearers looked at their present state and consulted the hunger and nakedness of their own bodies. That day in the house of darkness, on which Moctezuma knew his doom approached on horseback, garbed like that god who had vanished into the sunset. In their dark day, his bearers saw nothing. They were merely exchanging masters in the history of Mexico.
Vientos de piedra. The Mexican art is made of stone. The old Mexicans put the more abstract concepts into stone. Wind, fire, everything was put into stone. Vientos de piedra. Cuando el viento huía por los llanos, el hombre vino y lo hizo piedra. Cuando el sol caía por sus rayos, el hombre vino y lo hizo piedra. Cuando la serpiente corría por el tiempo, el hombre vino y la hizo piedra. Capturó a la muerte con los ojos, apresó a lo invisible con las manos, fijó la impermanencia en una forma y en todas esas formas metió dioses. Pero el viento metido en una piedra se hundió en el polvo y en la hierba. El sol del mediodía bajó a la noche y la serpiente emprendió el vuelo. La muerte salió de su escultura, se fue a los caminos y a los pueblos y desde entonces anda con cabeza humana. El hombre, fantasma de sí mismo, fue demolido por sus propios dioses. De todo aquello hubo lo que quedó al principio, unas piedras.
Winds of stone. When the wind fled over the plains, man came and turned it to stone. When the sun tumbled down its rays, man came and turned it to stone. When the snake slithered across time, man came and turned it to stone, ensnared death with his eyes, cupped the invisible in his hands, froze impermanence into a shape, and into each shape thrust a god. But the wind, trapped in a stone, sank into the dust and grass. The midday sun slipped into night, and the snake flew away. Death escaped from its statue, stalked roads and villages, and since then has a human head. Man, ghost of himself, was destroyed by his own gods. All that remained was there at the beginning, a few stones.
De este libro, Diario de Sueños, Journal of Dreams. This poem has been inspired by the actual violence in Mexico, and the theories that there is the return of the gods of human sacrifice are loose in Mexico now. La violencia en México comenzó con los dioses. La violencia en México comenzó con los dioses. Antes de que hubiera ciudades y templos, ya había desmembrados, desollados y decapitados en los ritos del alba. Los painales, sicarios de nuestro señor Huitzilopochtli, ya descendían de los cerros con un corazón humeante en las manos.
This poem is from the Diary of Dreams. The violence in Mexico began with the gods. The violence in Mexico began with the gods. Before the cities and temples were, they already flayed, quartered, and beheaded in the rites at dawn. Painal, executioner for our Lord Huitzilopochtli, was already descending from the hills, a smoldering heart cupped in his hands.
Somos hijos de dioses crueles. somos hijos de dioses crueles. De nada sirve ver sus pirámides derruidas, aún no se desvanece la sangre en sus altares, aún sus manos asfixian nuestros sueños. Su imagen está grabada en la piedra, sus espectros andan en nuestras ciudades, vestidos de sicarios. Al fondo de la pesadilla nos aguardan con sus puñales negros. Aunque se vayan de esta tierra a otra tierra, volveremos a procrearlos. Ellos volverán a emerger de nuestro adentro, atroces, despiadados, llevando nuestro rostro. Somos padres de dioses crueles.
We are children of cruel gods. We are children of cruel gods. No point looking at their ruined pyramids. The blood still hasn't washed from the steps. Their hands still strangle our dreams. Their likeness is graven on those stones. Their ghosts stalk our cities. Deep in the nightmare, their enforcers lie in wait for us with black daggers. Should they leave this earth for elsewhere, we will go back to beget them. They'll come back up from inside us with our features, appalling, merciless. We, parents of cruel gods.
From the Solar Poems, los poemas solares. El deseo de ser uno mismo, Kafka, desde Kafka. Si uno pudiera ser un jinete cabalgando a pelo sobre un caballo transparente a través de vientos y de lluvias, constantemente sacudido por la velocidad de la cabalgadura, si uno pudiera cabalgar intensamente hasta arrojar lejos de sí las ropas, porque no hacen falta las ropas, hasta deshacerse de las riendas, porque no hacen falta las riendas, hasta arrojar lejos de sí la sombra, porque no hace falta la sombra, y así viera que el campo no es campo, sino puñado de aire. Si uno pudiera arrojar lejos de sí el caballo y cabalgar solo sobre sí mismo.
The desire to be oneself, after Kafka. If you could be a horseman riding bareback through the winds and rains on a transparent horse, constantly buffeted by the velocity of your mount, if you could ride hard until clothes were cast off far behind you because there is no need of clothes, until reins were done with because there is no need of reins, until your shadow was cast far behind you because there's no need of a shadow. And then you might see countryside, not as countryside, but a fistful of air. If only you could cast the horse far behind you and ride on yourself.
Fray Gaspar de Carvajal recuerda el Amazonas. This was a priest who was among the first who entered the Amazon River. Viejo y enfermo, no tengo miedo a la muerte. Ya morí muchas veces. Por el río Grande he navegado y he visto sombras colgando de la luz y ecos brotando del sonido sordo que provoca el choque de las aguas con el mar abierto. De entre las ramas cálidas de la máscara verde de la orilla he visto surgir la flecha emponzoñada y he visto caer del cielo como aguja y tizón el rayo y el calor. Debajo de todo lecho hay un esqueleto acostado y en toda agua corre una serpiente de olvido. Más difícil es ser un viejo que tiene frío en las horas que preceden al alba y sentir dolor de huesos en la estación de lluvias que seguir en un barco perdido el cauce del río más caudaloso del mundo. Como todo hombre, día tras día he navegado hacia ninguna parte en busca de El Dorado, pero como todo hombre, solo he hallado el fulgor extremo de la pasión extrema de este río, que por sus tres corrientes, hambre, furor y cansancio, desemboca en la muerte.
Fray Gaspar de Carvajal remembers the Amazon, and he was one of the first, as Homero said, one of the first these preachers who entered the Amazon. Old and ailing, I have no fear of death. I have died many times already. Up the great river I have sailed and seen the shadows hanging from the light and volleys of echoes from that muffled noise set off by the crash of its waters into the open sea. From the steamy branches of the forest masking the shore, I have seen the poisoned arrows shoot and watched fall from the sky like needle and brand, the lightning and the heat. Under every bed there's a sleeping skeleton, and wiggling in every stream a viper of lost memory. It is harder to be an old man who gets cold in the hours before daybreak, feeling his bones ache in the rainy season, than to drift in a lost boat with the current of the mightiest river on earth. Day after day, like all men, I have sailed toward nowhere in search of El Dorado, but like them all, I have found only the extreme gleam of extreme passion of this river, which through its triple channels, hunger, weariness, and rage, pours into death.
Un poema de amor. Cuando hable con el silencio, cuando solo tenga una cadena de domingos grises para darte, cuando solo tenga un lecho vacío para compartir contigo un deseo que no se satisface ya con los cuerpos de este mundo, cuando ya no me basten las palabras del castellano para decirte lo que estoy mirando, cuando esté mudo de voz, de ojos y de movimiento, cuando haya arrojado lejos de mí el miedo a morir de cualquier muerte, cuando ya no tenga tiempo para ser yo, ni ganas de ser aquel que nunca he sido, cuando solo tenga la eternidad para ofrecerte, una eternidad de nadas y de olvido, una eternidad en la que ya no podré verte, ni tocarte, ni encelarte, ni matarte, cuando a mí mismo ya no me responda y no tenga día ni cuerpo, entonces seré tuyo, entonces te amaré para siempre.
A love poem. When I speak into the silence, when a chain of gray Sundays is all I have to give, when a bare bed all I have to share this passion on that the bodies of this world can't satisfy, when the words in Spanish don't suffice to say what I see, when my eyes in motion and my voice are struck dumb, when I have cast out the dread of dying every death, when I have no more time to be me, or yen to be what I've never been, when an eternity of nothings and unremembering is all I have to offer, eternities in which I cannot see or touch you, stir you to jealousy or murder you. When I can no more answer for myself than I have day or body, then will I be yours. Then I will love you always.
This is about an angels looking at the monarch butterfly sanctuaries, deforestation. Durante la noche, los bosques de mi pueblo aguardan escarchados las luces del amanecer. Las mariposas monarcas, como hojas cerradas, cubren el tronco y las ramas de los árboles. Superpuestas unas sobre otra, forman un solo organismo. El cielo azulea de frío. Los primeros rayos de sol tocan los racimos de las mariposas entumecidas, y un racimo cae abriéndose en alas. Otro racimo es alumbrado y por efecto de la luz se deshace en 1000 cuerpos voladores. El sol de las 8 de la mañana abre el secreto que dormía emperchado en el tronco de los árboles, y hay brisas de alas, hay ríos de mariposas en el aire. El alma de los muertos es visible entre los arbustos, puede tocarse con los ojos y las manos. Es mediodía. En el silencio perfecto se escucha el ruido de las motosierras que avanzan hacia nosotros, tumbando árboles y segando alas. El hombre, con sus 1000 hijos, desnudos y hambrientos, viene gritando sus necesidades y se lleva puñados de mariposas a la boca. El ángel dice nada. I want to say that here in the audience is our friend, Dr. Lincoln Brower, who is the leading scientist in the United States and in the world in monarch butterflies. Dr. Lincoln Brower.
Yes, and to add to that, Dr. Lincoln Brower was present in Morelia, Mexico, with Homero and a group of scientists and poets, and we did see the wintering place for the monarch butterflies, and this poem does deal with that, where deforestation has caused those butterflies to hatch early because the sun comes out, and then die. And so something as simple, not so simple as deforestation, can cause the extinction of an entire species. And this poem is about angels and about that as well. About angels. Through the night, coated in frost, the woods around my town wait for the light of dawn. Like closed leaves, the monarch butterflies cover the trunk and branches of the trees, superimposed one upon the other like a single organism. The sky goes blue with cold. The first rays of sun touch the clusters of numb butterflies, and one bunch falls, opening into wings. Another cluster is lit, and through the effect of the light splinters into 1,000 flying bodies. The 8 o'clock sun opens up a secret that slept perched on the trunks of the trees, and there is a breeze of wings, rivers of butterflies in the air. Visible through the bushes, the souls of the dead can be felt with the eye and hand. It is noon. In the perfect silence, the sound of a chainsaw is heard advancing toward us, shearing wings and felling trees. Man, with his 1,000 naked and hungry children, comes howling his needs and shoving fistfuls of butterflies into his mouth. The angel says nothing.
Un día un hombre olvida. Un día un hombre olvida un mar, un continente y un planeta. Olvida las facciones de su padre y las huellas de su propia mano. Olvida el fulgor de sus ojos en otros ojos y el sonido del agua en su cabeza. Olvida el timbre de su voz y el ruido de su sueño que despierta a otros, pero no a sí mismo. Olvida el traje y la casa que habitó, la calle y la ciudad que lo olvidaron. Olvida el amor, la revelación, la muerte, el espejo que no devuelve ya su imagen. Un día un hombre se olvidará a sí mismo, olvidará que olvida.
One day a man forgets a sea, a continent, a planet. He forgets the features on his father's face, the prints of his own hand. He forgets the flash of his eyes in another's and the sound of water in his head. He forgets the timbre of his own voice and the noise of his dreams that wakens everyone but him. He forgets the suit and the house he lived in, the street and the city that forgot him, forgets love, revelations, death, the mirror that no longer redeems his image. A man will forget himself one day, forget he has forgotten.
Perro Spectral, this poem was dedicated to my dog, Rufus, who was dead and came back as a dream. Perro Espectral, a Rufus. Lo vi venir corriendo por el aire en respuesta a la voz que lo llamaba en vida. Todo era luz en las praderas de la tarde, todo era ausencia en los cuerpos presentes en la calle. Su pelambre amarillo estaba descolorido, sus orejas negras, transparentes. A mi lado ya no emitía los ruidos con que celebraba mi retorno después de las separaciones, ni corría de un lado a otro para festejarme. Jadeó su afecto y me extendió la pata. Yo atravesé su pecho con la mano, yo acaricié su hocico inconsistente, sus mandíbulas estaban desencajadas y sus ojos abiertos, ciegos. No sé a dónde se había ido desde aquella noche en que lo dejé dormido a la puerta de mi cuarto, y al amanecer no lo encontré esperándome. Venía de un lugar donde no hay comida y para beber solo hay luz oscura. Como a una sombra lo había llamado por su nombre. Rápidamente nos reconocimos, le puse la correa roja en el cuello y con la pata impalpable abrió la puerta. Era hora de su paseo y salimos a la calle, pero en la esquina nos desvanecimos.
The ghost of a dog to Rufus. I saw him come running in the air to the voice that called him in life. Everything was light in the meadow of the afternoon. Everything in the bodies present on the street and absence. His thick yellow fur was colorless, his black ears two transparencies. At my side, he emitted none of his sounds to hail my return after our times apart, nor did he dash from side to fate me. He panted his affection and offered me a paw. I passed a hand through his chest, stroked his filmy muzzle. His jaws were unjoined and opened eyes blind. I don't know where he went since that night when I left him asleep at my bedroom door and found him not waiting for me in the morning. From a place where there is no food and only dull light to drink, he came. Like a shadow, no one had called him by his name. Quickly, we recognized one another. I put his red lead on his neck, and with an impalpable paw, he pushed open the door. It was time for his walk, and out we went into the street, but vanished at the corner together.
Retrato de mi padre con tijeras. Llueve en Contepec, mi padre está en la tienda y las tijeras en su mano se abren como dos cuchillas. Las tijeras al cerrarse rasgan la manta, tela de pobre, como si la vida se vendiera por centímetros. El metro sobre el mostrador ignora lo que mide, o su madera mide en secreto la tristeza de mi padre, porque tendero y cliente parecen cortados por la misma tijera, la de la tristeza sin razón ni límite. Llueve en Contepec, la tarde empedrada viene por la calle hacia la casa donde mi madre cuece los duraznos. Es una tarde verde que anda por los cerros y abre la puerta del zaguán, puerta de toda maravilla.
Portrait of my father with scissors. It rains in Contepec. My father is inside the store, the scissors in his hands opening into two blades. When they shut, the scissors pinch at the bolt of cheap cotton cloth, as if life were being sold by the centimeter. Is the meter strip on the counter oblivious to what it measures, or does its wood mete out secretly the sadness in my father? For shopkeeper and customer appear cut by the same scissor of limitless, unreasoning sadness. It rains in Contepec. The cobblestoned afternoon comes down the street to the house where my mother is stewing peaches. The evening is green that drifts across the hills and in through the front doorway of all delight.
And now the last poem, El Ojo de la Ballena. This poem was inspired because our defense during 5 years of the sanctuary in Mexico, in Lagoon San Ignacio, where the great whale is born and reproduces and mates. And there was a project of the Mexican government and the Mitsubishi of Japan to build the salt works, largest of the mines, largest in the world, affecting the sanctuary of the great whales. Then this was like a celebratory poem written in the year 2000 after the victory about the project, against the project. El ojo de la ballena, y Dios creó las grandes ballenas. Y Dios creó las grandes ballenas allá en Laguna San Ignacio, y cada criatura que se mueve en los muslos sombreados del agua. Y creó al delfín y al lobo marino, a la garza azul y a la tortuga verde, al pelícano blanco, al águila real y al cormorán de doble cresta. Y Dios dijo a las ballenas: fructificad y multiplicaos en actos de amor que sean visibles desde la superficie, solo por una burbuja, por una aleta ladeada, asida la hembra debajo por el largo pene prensil, que no hay mayor esplendor del gris que cuando la luz lo platea. Su respiración profunda es una exhalación. Y Dios vio que era bueno que las ballenas se amaran y jugaran con sus crías en la laguna mágica. Y Dios dijo: 7 ballenas juntas hacen una procesión, 100 hacen un amanecer. Y las ballenas salieron a atisbar a Dios entre las estrías danzantes de las aguas, y Dios fue visto por el ojo de una ballena, y las ballenas llenaron los mares de la tierra, y fue la tarde y la mañana del 5º día.
The eye of the whale, and God created the great whales, Genesis 1:21. And there in San Ignacio Lagoon, God created the great whales and each creature that moves on the shadowy thighs of the water. God created dolphin and sea lion, blue heron and green turtle, white pelican, golden eagle, and double-crested cormorant. And God said into the whales, "Be fruitful and multiply in acts of love that are visible on the surface only through a bubble or fin flapping while the cow is seized on the long prehensile penis below. There is no splendor greater than a gray when the light turns it silver. Its bottomless breath is an exhalation." And God saw that love between the whales and the sporting with their calves in the magical lagoon was good. And God said, 7 whales together make up a procession, 100 a daybreak. And the whales came up to spot God over the dancing gunnels of the waters, and God was sighted by a whale's eye. And whales filled the waters of the earth, and the evening and the morning were the 5th day. Thank you.
We have Homero's books available, and please buy them and comment. He will sign them. Thank you, Homero. Remember, vote early and often. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Homero and Betty for coming to us from Mexico City, and thank you, Rita, for those lovely readings.
Thank you.
I want one down here for me.
Ok, vamos a... bueno, for me. Para Rita.